This is a talk for my old karate mentor, David Essoyan. So short and to the point, and actions speak louder than words. This action it's an expression of humility, a bow. It's related with the primitive balance reflex of a baby, the tonic labyrinthine reflex. It's related with the F.M. Alexander's direction, let the head go forward and up. Depriving oneself of oxygen for one breath. It's an exploration of suffering, of stress. And when you breathe in, of grace. Of having what you depend on. In reflex terms, it's related with the baby grasp and gasp reflex, which if you're consciously controlling your breathing, we avoid breathing in through the mouth or gasping for air. In the martial arts too, of course, that's where breath control comes in. This has to do with integration of the two sides of the body and the brain, left and right, either side of the spine, either side of the midline. In developmental terms, it's related with the asymmetric tonic neck reflex, which when it's immature causes an unconscious separation between left and right. So the baby, for example, can't cross the midline until that reflex becomes somewhat under conscious control or inhibited. You may just have seen the blue tick go into its nest there. There you go. And out again. Speaking of grace, you see, the reason I made that, it took about 20 minutes. It's just two pieces of cladding, one with a hole in, just sort of fastened to a pre-existing electric pole, concrete pole. There, it's gone back in again. Autumn last year, I just noticed that the blue tits were scouting around for a nesting site. So it was like it wasn't my own idea. It was like they were asking me in a way to put the nest boxes here and there. So I did, and that's the reward. So it's a wild bird, totally wild creature, but it kind of depended on my wanting to help it, and at the same time it was asking me for something. So it's a little kind of teaching of dependence arising, really. Dependent, something's happening now, which is a result of a lot of things that happened before, and it's very difficult to say where it started. Did it start with the blue tit? Did it start with me? No, that's why the dedicatory verses of MMK start by saying Anirodham Anutpadam. The Buddha's teaching is beyond stopping and beyond starting. In emptiness, there is no starting point. no ending point. But there is a direction. So this has to do with that in the sense that we do want a separation, but we don't want an unconscious separation. We want a conscious separation. What we want is an integration, which comes from inhibiting the unconscious separation. In Alexander terms, this has to do with let the back lengthen and widen. Because lengthening and widening is an unwinding. It's like if you take some material and twist it, you see what happens as you twist it more and more is it shortens and contracts into itself. And if you let go, you get a lengthening and a widening. And similarly, in sitting, if you're twisted and tense, there's a narrowing and a shortening. So the direction we want to grow in, like a tree growing, is lengthening and widening. And that is, in terms of the reflexes, it's an unwinding of any twisting that's been caused by imperfect working, or aberrant asymmetric tonic neck reflex, we call it in developmental work. And then the fourth thing I did, or thought, which you wouldn't see necessarily in the camera, is I sent my knees forwards and away. And this has to do with integrating the top and the bottom. In reflex terms, it has to do with a reflex which is a bridging reflex between the primitive and postural reflexes. It's not a true primitive reflex because it's not present at birth, but about 6 months when the baby pushes away from the ground, well, its neck extends and it pushes away from the ground, and its hips and knees flex so that it goes into the cat-sit position. If that reflex is not working properly, if it's immature, aberrant, not well integrated, not inhibited, then in the same way that the asymmetric tonic neck reflexes messes up coordination between the two sides, it messes up coordination between what's going on below the pelvis and what's going on. We want all this to be in one piece, like a body dharma doll. And if that symmetric tonic neck reflex is causing bad coordination between this and the legs, then the legs will the big muscles of the legs will bully the body out of place. So in the martial arts terms, this is related with strength in the hara or the tanden, because if the knees are going forwards and away, as Alexander intended that direction, it's a release of the legs out of the pelvis, and that allows the whole thing to function strongly as a healthy unit. Let the neck be free, to let the head go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen, sending the knees forwards and away. Now, the background to this talk, which is already longer than I intended, is I wrote to David in our last exchange. It occurred to me while I was sitting just now that I'll tailor a talk for you and put it on YouTube. Melting and collecting the mind. So perhaps the most important words the Buddha says to his brother Nanda in the story of Saundarananda is in Sanskrit, tad vīryaṁ kuru śāntaye viniyataṁ vīrye sarva-rddhayaḥ tad, so, vīryaṁ, effort, kuru, make, śāntaye, in the direction of peace, or in the direction of softening, or in the direction of melting. Viniyataṁ, assuredly, for. Vīrye, for, in effort. Sarva-rddhayaḥ, all growth. So what we want is growth. And we don't know what growth ultimately will look like. But we can be assured that growth lies in making effort, śāntaye, in the direction of śānti, peace, softening or melting. And the reason I say melting is because the Buddha says to Nanda a metaphor of the goldsmith, which I've discussed at length in previous videos, but the top and bottom of it is that the goldsmith melts the gold and then he collects it. And that is a metaphor for what? He melts. How does he melt the gold? He holds it in the furnace. He stands at the fire, stands at the furnace and puts the gold in the fire. So, over the years, one thing I've really learnt in practice, see, if the practitioner is like the goldsmith, then in a way, I've been blessed by the fact that I wake up every morning kind of on fire, full of negative emotion. Mr. Angry. Brad Warner wrote a chapter of his book devoted to me, which he titled Mr. Angry. So in the Alexander work, Marjorie Barlow used to tell me again and again, being wrong is the best friend you've got in this work. So the wrongness, it's not that it's not that anger is right, but being on fire is the goldsmith's best friend. So this is also the wisdom of Wim Hof, if you look at his breathing work or cold water exposure. The cold water is always there. The potential to make a fire is always there. The potential to get into the sea is always there. And if you've got appropriate karma, you can wake up every morning and the suffering is always available. But the choice is whether do we enter into it willingly, voluntarily, like getting into cold water or going into the sauna. Do we actually relish the opportunity, like the fire is the goldsmith's best friend, isn't it? If the task, he's got this solid gold that he needs to melt, he needs to transform it into this sort of shining liquid, this luminescent golden liquid. How is he going to do that without fire? And there's a lot that has to happen before he has the gold in particle form the dirt washer has to do his job, or more accurately, as the Buddha described it, the water has to wash the dirt away. So we're relying on the waters of grace somehow to separate the gold from the dirt which contains it. But really the goldsmith's job, the goldsmith's best friend in the metaphor is the fire. So voluntary exposure to suffering, that's not news to a martial artist. How there can be the kind of effort that we want to make in the direction of softening involves willingly exposing ourselves to the fire, working with the fire. And in this case, the fire is suffering. So in my exchange with David, I added as an afterthought, clinging makes our mind hard. Story of my life. So how Zazen can melt the mind is the Dharma to understand. How does when we have hard feelings because we've been hard done by, how do we cause the mind to melt as the goldsmith causes the gold to melt? Well, the hard feelings are something hard, something so Asvaghosha talks about the practitioner feels sorry for the clinging, samsaktam, fixed, clinging, stuck, viṣaya-kripanam jagat, the object-needy world. So the choice often is between kind of willingly going into the fire or distracting our mind with objects. So that verse begins like this, yadi, dvandvārāme, jagati, viṣaya-vyagra-hṛdaye, if in a world that delights in duality and is heart distracted, heart-hṛdaye, distracted Vyagra, viṣaya, by objects. That's one way of not looking suffering in the eye, is distracting ourselves with objects. And that's easy to do in a world that delights in duality. The world we live in is governed by realism, and realism is essentially the othering of reality. It gets us to science focuses on the objective stuff, the objective world. That's different from what the Buddha is describing, the practitioner who, in a world that delights in duality, vivikte nirdvandvo, vivikte in seclusion, in separateness, nirdvandvo, without duality, viharati, he fares well, he goes, karti, a man of action, śānta-hṛdaya, viharati karti śānta-hṛdaya. He fares well, a man of action. His heart, śanta, softened, melted. So there's the contrast is between a situation where You might be enjoying yourself, but you're distracted by objects. Or, without duality, like the goldsmith at the fire, a man of action, you're not distracted by objects, and the suffering is there, like the fire is there. Yadi dvandvārāme jagati viṣaya-vyagra-hṛdaye vivikte dvandvo viharati kirti śāntahṛdaya tathā pitva prajna rasamamritavac triptahṛdayo. If tathā, then, pitva, he drinks, drinking, prajna, rasam, the nectar of wisdom, the nectar of understanding, amritavat, which is like the deathless nectar in ancient Indian legends, the deathless nectar, the nectar of immortality. The triptahṛdayo, his heart is full. Vivikta samsaktam viṣaya-kripanam shochati jagat. Separately, vivikta, he sorrows, shochati. Viṣaya-kripanam, object needy. Samsaktam, stuck, clinging. The object needy world. The stuck, clinging, object needy world. So speaking of delighting in duality, see, David is, the background to our talk is David is by no means a fan of Donald Trump. And what I recognise from that is in the world that delights in duality, people on either side of political debates, they like to demonise some other, and they project evil onto the other. Now, in light of emptiness, evil does not reside in a person. It's not that a person is inherently evil. We can all do evil. Evil is happening in the world. But it's a mistake to objectify it, or especially to demonise Donald Trump if you're on that side. If you're a sort of a woke lefty, you demonise Donald Trump, you other Donald Trump, and ultimately the melting away that we want is the melting away of prapancha, prapanchopashama, the melting away of the melting away of othering, the melting away of objectification. See, in the goldsmith metaphor, ironically, the goldsmith is making beautiful objects, beautiful designs, but he's making beautiful works of art in light of emptiness. So they're not separate, objectifiable things. Well, they're objectifiable, but not. The first process is you've got the solid gold that's melted, and then when it's workable, it's made into beautiful objects. But what we have in the world is people unconsciously objectify things, and David's othering of Donald Trump is a spectacular example of it. And on the other side, of course, you've got the people on the other side of American politics who are supporters of Donald Trump. That they, for them, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and Barack Obama are the other, the very embodiments of evil. I think everybody tends to agree that someone like Henry Kissinger, who was a sort of a master of the dark arts of realpolitik, he's a very easy person for people to other and describe as pure evil. But in light of emptiness, everybody that's in that world is somehow a kind of a victim. They're not inherently evil. They weren't born evil. But they got caught up in an evil agenda. They were co-opted by an empire of lies. So prapancha upashamade, that's what we're working towards. That's what the Buddha taught ultimately, the melting away of othering. But on the way, there's our own clinging. There's our own clinging to give up. So the melting away of othering is not got just from reading a book. It's not something you just intellectually understand and then stop othering. So the gold mining metaphor, there are two verses and both say the first one says śamayati saṁkṣipati cha. He melts it, he causes it to melt, and then he collects it. And the collecting is a bit like recollecting. It suggests mindfulness or thinking, remembering, smriti. So first, you have to melt the mind, cause the mind to soften. Then it's workable. We can collect it, and then śamayati prerayati cha. Śamayati prerayati cha. Śamayati manaḥ prerayati cha. And prerayati means directed. So that the goldsmith directs the gold into molds or into different designs. And we want to direct the mind among the powers of knowing. And the main power of knowing is the power to overcome asrava, the polluting influences, by bhavana, the practice of letting happen, or the practice of cultivating. One of which practices karate-do, the way of karate, can be understood. But the original way is sitting in lotus, sending the knees forwards and away. As the kind of ultimate expression of melting away, of othering, sending the knees forwards and away. While the back lengthens and widens. So sending the knees forwards and away, if you do it well, if you think it correctly, it kind of pulls, exercises a pull on your gluteals are stretched by your thinking if you send your knees forwards and away. And that the iliopsoas release, so your diaphragm, like a mushroom, growing. The diaphragm can open out. All the spirals are released from the grip of the legs, so there's a lengthening and a widening. So knees forwards and away expresses integration of top and bottom, but also indirectly. Knees forward and away can only really happen if the back is lengthening, widening. The two directions are dependent on each other. So knees forward and away brings one back into one's own back. In Alexander terms, it produces strength in the tendon, strength in the hara, the martial arts would say in Japan. Knees forwards and away, so that there's strength in the back, and the back is lengthening and widening. And that lengthening and widening continues even. It's easier to get the back to lengthen and widen in an advantageous position, like sitting in lotus, and an advantageous environment. It's quiet, by the forest, the fresh air, not too hot, not too cold. Those are all advantageous for the back lengthening and widening. But the real challenge comes when we're subjected to stress, which we can do voluntarily. By depriving ourselves of oxygen just for one breath. And then when we breathe in, not gasping, keeping the thought of lengthening and widening.